Welcome to Let's Talk Ads. We're here to push your growth marketing tips, fun and chats. Tune in, let's rock the show.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Ads. My name is Andre, CEO of Admiral Media, and today we are strapping a jetpack to our growth playbook because sitting across from me is Natasha Saviuk. She's the growth director of Wealthsimple. Sorry for the tongue breaker here. And if you haven't heard about Wealthsimple yet, it's Canada's largest FinTech. They have approx 3 million clients, if I'm not mistaken, at a 5 billion valuation and more than 1,500 employees. So it's really big. Natasha is the marketer who scaled paid spend during a crypto winter, doubled engagement while everyone else cried, oh, iOS 14, the apocalypse, and says CAC is a vanity metric. But even more so, and this is a super interesting part of her life for me, Natasha has a PhD in neuroscience. And I wonder how this transition to growth marketing happened, but also how this background may help in leading a big marketing team. So I would hand it over to Natasha. Maybe give a quick intro about yourself.
Thanks, Andre. I'm happy to be here. So, like you said, I'm Natasha, and I lead growth at Wealthsimple, specifically user acquisition, cross-sell, and retention. At Wealthsimple, our mission is to help Canadians achieve financial freedom, and we do that through a suite of financial tools like buying stocks commission-free, a managed invest portfolio where you can have a diversified portfolio managed for you for a low fee. Naturally, we have crypto, we have a high interest checking account, and to tie it all out, we have tax. And as a business, we really care about increasing our market share, as well as increasing the share of wallet with our customers. And incentives have been a really effective way for us to do that. So I'm excited to share more about that with you today and our listeners. And a bit more about me outside of work. I really enjoy cooking. Well, actually, I really enjoy eating, but cooking is kind of just a means to an end there. I really like running as well. I just completed my 5th marathon in Brighton, England, a couple weeks ago.
Well,
And I'm a pretty creative person too, so I really like sewing and painting and things like that. And as you can probably tell, I have 2 cats.
very cute. Yeah, the title today is How to Save on Paid Social with Incentives. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit what that means. Like, what do you understand under an incentive when it comes to app marketing or marketing in general?
Yeah, definitely. So we've used all types of incentives, but most recently, what's worked really well for us is cash incentives and physical incentives, most particularly Apple devices like free iPhones, free MacBooks. And on the acquisition and consolidation front, one thing that's worked really well for us is when we give our clients a carrot, like a percentage match of their assets or a free iPhone if they consolidate their assets with Wealthsimple and move over their accounts to Wealthsimple. So those are the types of incentives that we see really work for us, and the types of behaviors that when we incentivize them lead to really good business outcomes, without too much gamification or poor users that you're bringing into the ecosystem.
Okay, understand. And how did you use that in your acquisition? Like, did you just offer to everyone, hey, you get a free MacBook when you join the app? Or I can imagine that's a quite expensive acquisition methodology.
For sure. Well, the when it comes to the Apple promo, we ran that in Q4, and actually it's been one of our most successful promos to date. And the way that it worked is that you had to bring in a certain amount of assets in order to access or to get a certain reward. So the way that the Apple promo is structured more specifically is that you would be able to choose between an iPhone or a MacBook, and the tier of the device increased with how much you brought. So if you had 100K, you would get an iPhone 16 or just a MacBook Air. 300K, it'd be a MacBook Pro or a iPhone 16 Pro, and so on. The last tier was 500K, you get a more premium device. And so we do that. And in addition to that, we have a hold period. So you have to move your money, but you have to keep it for, 12 months, 24 months, depending on the specific promo. And with those two things together, sure, the value per incentive is expensive, but the value per conversion that we're getting is actually quite high. So the unit economics work out quite well.
Oh, nice. Okay. But it means like I had to have like 100K in assets that I just connect or
Yeah.
move over to Wealthsimple. This is interesting to me because I would expect, like, just from the gut feeling, that a user who has already more than 100K in assets doesn't really care to get a free iPhone or something. Is it something you knew because of your background, maybe, that this will definitely work, or is it, I mean, the neuroscience background, that people will always ask for something for free, no matter how rich they are, or was it just like, hey, let's try that and see what happens?
It's one of those things that was surprising to me, and I think that even internally there was a lot of skepticism. So the first time we did this, it was actually with free AirPods. And exactly what you said, people were like, if I'm rich, why would I care about AirPods? I could just go buy AirPods. And at the time, the way that the promo was structured is you had to move something like $40,000, you get a free pair of AirPods. And up until this point, we were doing kind of smaller incentive campaigns, so on and so forth. So this was the first time that we're like, we're going to give you something that's worth 300-ish dollars and you have to move 40,000. And what we noticed is that it worked basically. So we saw a lot of people participating, maybe less people in total, but because the average value per conversion was so high, our campaign was way more successful than anything we'd done in the past. And so that's what really allowed us to kind of have that aha moment that if we focus on the average value per conversion, we can really scale incentives as a channel. And so obviously, how do you up the ante from from AirPods? It's with an iPhone, from an iPhone with a MacBook, so on and so forth. So we've been really able to scale in that way. But again, it's something that was kind of surprising to us that the physical item would be so effective. But I guess there's something to it too that at the end of the day, buying a new pair of AirPods is kind of an annoying thing. It's just expensive enough that it's irritating to you. So if you get it for free, why not?
So interesting. I would never expect that, to be honest. I mean, the most of the things that I see happening in Europe or something is maybe you can win a pair of AirPods or something, but not like that. If I'm giving access to data or giving access to my financials, that I'm then definitely getting something. So it was structured this way that everyone who connected this amount of assets would get that. It was not a win something in case. Okay, understand.
Yeah, exactly. So if
Um,
you meet the criteria, you are qualified and then you get your reward.
mhm. Did you run this across the entire user base for all new customers who sign up? They get this, or did you limit this to a certain acquisition channel, like only Facebook acquisition was getting this incentive?
So we run it for everyone. On the paid side, it tends to be more a lead gen play, so trying to acquire new clients who maybe the incentive is the hook to get them to come to Wealthsimple. But it works extremely effectively with our own client base as well. And what's surprising is that we've run now, more than half a dozen campaigns like this, and we see that there's still so much potential to tap into in our existing client base, but we're getting better and better at kind of that lead gen side of things and acquiring new users and using incentives for attracting high quality clients to the business.
That's very interesting. We managed a couple of FinTech apps that also do connect your bank accounts, connect your portfolio, whatever things, but they've never advertised something like that. So super interesting that this actually work. They work in very different markets, not Canada, but
Yeah.
it's
But to be clear, you're having to transfer your account to Wealthsimple. So you're moving your entire assets over. It's not just connecting your bank account or your outside portfolio. You're actually consolidating. And just to give you a sense of how well it's worked, I think at this point we've like 10x'd the monthly assets that we bring into the business compared to maybe 2 years ago when we started. So just the scale at which it's worked and allowed us to grow our incentives is astronomical, and it's just had a huge impact on the business and scaled our the velocity at which we were able to grow our assets under management at the company.
wow, super impressive. I'm blown away by that. Like, I mean, the typical marketer would just say, "Hey, I need a new creative, and hopefully I'm improving my CAC by 0.5, whatever, right?" But 10xing is a very rare case.
Yeah, it's just staggering. If you look at the baseline metrics, you can very clearly see where on the chart we started to do incentives, and it just has that, you know, that nice hockey stick chart that you like to see when it comes to our assets. So it's been a really impactful channel for sure.
Interesting. Did you see something like virality connected to that? Like once you started it, that suddenly there was a higher K factor, lots of more people coming in because other people were talking about it. Or was it really just those people that saw the promo connected send their assets to you. What can you say about that?
It's interesting that you asked that. So, definitely, whenever we run a promotion, we see an uptick in referrals of these high net worth clients. And what we've seen is actually if we're able to tie our referral incentive to whatever's in market for the promo, we're able to scale that referral kind of word of mouth even more. So, one example, again, going back to this Apple promo that we recently ran, naturally, for existing clients who have all their assets at Wealthsimple, it can be a bit frustrating that they can't participate because all their money is already here and other people are getting these free iPhones. It feels unfair. And so, one thing that we did is we set up a referral program where clients could, by referring, 2 or 4 or 6 friends, access the promo. And for us, the unit economics worked out because the cost to on the lead gen side kind of works out in a similar way as if we were paying it out as a referral bonus. So the math kind of works out. And what we saw is that when we did that, we were able to really massively increase the number of referrals. So we're kind of like tapping into that behavior that people are already doing. When there's a promo in market, they'll share it with their friends, they'll tell them to join the company to participate. When we were able to find the right incentive, which in this case is like you can get an iPhone too, we really, really accelerated the growth of clients that were referring high net worth people to participate.
And where's the limit? What do you think? Like, until which point will people do such thing? Or do you reach the limit? Let's say someone who has 500K on the bank account will probably never be interested in such a promo.
Do you mean in terms of an individual person or our client base as a whole?
No,
So
individuals. Yeah.
what's interesting is that we have a lot of different promo structures, and certainly different people are motivated by different types of things. So another thing that works really well for us is a percentage match where, for instance, we'll give you 1% of the value of the assets that you bring over to Wealthsimple. And we see that with those types of promos, we actually have to set an upper bound to like not have the finance team murder us basically, because some people will move like millions of dollars at a time to participate in the promo. Naturally, like we have salespeople and BDRs that are involved in the process. If you're moving that much money, you for sure want to, talk to a human and not just do the entire process on an app. But there doesn't seem to really be an upper bound in terms of how much people are willing to transfer when you have the right incentive.
Interesting. And coming back to the original title, like saving on paid social because you're doing incentives, did you see such an effect? Like, did you need to spend less on Meta and other channels, or was it just improving the metrics a lot at the same time so that you spent the same maybe, but you just got a ton more users in?
So it really depends. Earlier on in our business, we would use incentives in our ads. So, for instance, one thing that works really well is if you sign up, you'll get a free stock. That's something that was really popularized by Robinhood in the US. It worked really well for us too. And what we saw is that when we gave clients an incentive to join, counterintuitively, it actually makes your ad costs go down and your CACs go down. And so ultimately, you net out spending less per client, even though you're kind of signing up front to give them money. But at where we're at now in our marketing maturity, maybe, is that incentives are so effective for us that it's way more effective than any kind of app install ads that we run. Naturally, we're still doing a lot of lead gen, both through referrals and through social channels and search and whatnot. But because incentives are so effective for us, we're actually not spending as much on paid app install ads as we maybe would have in another circumstance. And incentives are allowing us to attract such high quality clients that we're able to actually drive our business metrics in a more significant way. And an interesting kind of pivot in our business is that we're focusing a lot more on referrals now. So again, a lot less on the traditional like app install paid social and a lot more on the channels where we're giving that marketing spend directly back to our client. And so far it's worked really well for us.
And maybe let's jump a little bit back on talking about your background in neuroscience to now being the growth director in Wealthsimple. What sparked your interest in that field? How did it happen that you changed?
Yeah, so it's definitely not the typical career path. I took a bit of a circuitous route to get to where I am now. But well, how it all started is probably like a lot of people. My parents wanted me to be a doctor. And so when I was doing my undergrad, I decided that it'd be great for my resume if I joined a lab. And it ended up kind of backfiring, I guess, on my parents because I liked doing research so much that I stayed in that lab and I kept working at it until I actually got a PhD. The one thing about research, though, is that the pace was not really aligned with how I am and my personality. In research, you can spend your entire career just pursuing one question. And in the end, how much influence you'll have had in the world of science is kind of TBD. Whereas in growth and in business, like you know this, if it doesn't work, you'll know right away and like you won't live another day basically. So that kind of pace of feedback is much more aligned to me and what keeps me going. And so towards the end of my PhD, I actually started a business and that's where I got my first exposure to marketing. I worked on it for about 2 years. Ultimately, it didn't work out, but it's what made me realize that, I kind of had a knack for growth. And so, yeah, from there, I
What
worked
kind of
for
company was that?
yeah, it was a company that was doing made to measure clothing for women. If you know Indochino in the US, it's kind of it was intended to be the female equivalent. And what's interesting there is that at the time I was living in Montreal and AI was really starting to boom in Montreal specifically. AI startups were becoming really glamorous. And what I thought I could do is, and I also have a background in sewing. I've been making my own clothes since I'm a teenager, basically. And so what I thought I could do is, and maybe I won't get into the details, but I had a hypothesis that you can use machine learning to produce made to measure clothing at scale. And it worked to a degree, but that's obviously hard to prove and even harder to do when you have no clue what you're doing. So I still
Okay.
think it could work, but didn't work out at the time for me. So yeah.
When was that?
It was in like 2016, 2017.
Oh, wow. Okay. Still early with the machine learning stuff then.
Yeah, but it was all the rage, and subscription models too were all the rage then, but I couldn't figure out how to make that work for my business. Maybe if you wanted a suit every month or something, could have gotten it to
Uh,
work.
if you marry every month, then maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Before I ask you more about the neuroscience background and how you incorporate this into marketing, can you quickly elaborate what is neuroscience so that we all have let's say, a very basic understanding what we are talking about here?
Yeah. So neuroscience is the study of your brain and how it works to keep you alive, functioning, thinking, learning, as well as all of the diseases that might be associated with that. So, what's going wrong in your brain? And in my research specifically, I was investigating how mutations that lead to autism in humans affect learning and memory later on in life, and also how it affects the development of your nervous system when you're born. So, a lot of my research was like on the lab using live brain tissue and trying to actually measure the connections between neurons themselves.
Oh, okay. That's
Hopefully,
very
that
hands-on.
is a good explanation. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And how do you connect this with marketing? Like, do you use any of the experiences or knowledge that you've gained in that field for your day-to-day job now?
Yes, but not in the way that people typically think. And actually, maybe as an aside, when I started working for my own company and doing marketing, I had this idea that marketing was brand campaigns because like that's what you typically see in marketing as an outsider. And I was always so puzzled. I was like, how do you actually know that your campaign is working? It seems like it's very expensive and you don't have a clear way to know if it works. And then when I started doing it, I realized that in marketing, especially digital marketing, you have a ton of data to work with. So marketing is actually a lot of math and a lot of experimentation. You have to be creative, but it's as much of a science as it is an art. And obviously, with the experimentation and measurement and all that, it was something I was really familiar with from my time in the lab. So that part of it came really easily to me. And then how it continues to influence me is again, maybe something that people don't know is research is incredibly competitive. And so if you want to be a professor, for instance, you need your research published in the top journals. And how do you get your research published in the top journals? Like you need to have really important discoveries. And how do you do that? Well, you actually have to test a lot of different things and kind of figure out what's going to be the project or the piece of work that's going to be really novel and important. And so when you're in that phase, you're not being super rigorous and like applying the perfect scientific method. You're just like running tests every day, just trying to figure out what's going to be the thing that's worth investing all that time in. And only when you figure out what your project is going to be do you really apply that rigor and you get your statistical significance and your sample size, so on and so forth. And the same is true in marketing, right? Where if you want to have impact, you have to work on impactful things. And that sounds so obvious, but I can't tell you the number of times where people will, share results and they'll say it's statistically significant, but then it's like a 2% lift and it netted out to like 20 accounts or something like that. So you kind of have to do that work of, if this works, how impactful is it going to be? And use that to guide you on what you actually choose to work on. And so in at work, I'm probably a lot less scientific and rigorous than you would expect when I'm in that exploratory phase, because I'm just trying to figure out like what's worth my time, not, I'm not so concerned about running perfect experiments.
Interesting. The work approach that I was always following, even 10 years ago, I was managing a team of 20 people in marketing, and now as an agency, we are constantly overloaded anyways, not enough resources. So prioritization of tasks is a big lever for us. And I was always preaching, if it doesn't bring 20,000 additional users, don't touch it. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Like,
so,
what's the
right.
minimum
So,
threshold? Yeah, exactly. If it doesn't meet the minimum bar, don't even think about it. Get it out of your mind. Yeah.
uh,
You'd have been a good researcher.
uh, but somehow your story about you have to test a lot of things and just do little experiments and see what's happening with that, and then conclude, does it have an impact or something? Also reminds me a little bit of marketing tests and stuff. Definitely. So you just throw a couple of things into the pond and see if it creates some waves, right? And then you
Exactly.
really follow up and dive deeper into it. Can you share maybe one memorable failure from your early days in marketing and what you've learned from it, personally or professionally?
So that's such a tough question because
Except from the failed startup.
yeah, such a tough question because I have so many failures and I kind of erase them from my memory. So it's actually really hard to think of something. Usually just like move on and don't think about it twice. But maybe from one of my first like official marketing roles post startup. So I was working for an overnight oats company, direct to consumer, and this was at the very beginning of COVID, where when people, the grocery stores were empty and there was so much frenzy around, you know, making your store of supplies. And I went to the grocery store and there was a completely empty shelf. I took a photo of it and turned it into an ad. It's so striking when you walk into a grocery store with completely empty shelves. It really gave that apocalyptic vibe. So yeah, I took the photo and I wrote some sort of copy on it to the effect of like, buy our oats, they're shelf stable and it's healthy for you. And it worked super well as an ad actually. But it really upset people as well because you can imagine people were freaking out and very sensitive in that time. So ultimately, even though it was working really well, we decided to take it down. And it makes sense, right? Because sometimes we're so focused on our metrics that we forget that there's another person on the other side. And I think in this case, when you're a smaller company, maybe it doesn't really matter because you're just trying to survive to the next month. It's not, you're allowed to, you can afford to take these bigger risks. But naturally, when you have a bigger scale, like let's say Wealthsimple right now, your brand it matters a lot more. And you just, you don't want to take one step forward just to take two steps back. So you have to bring a lot more emotional intelligence to your work. So that was definitely a lesson for me about like the balance that you have to strike between, performance and clicks, but then remembering that there's humans on the other side of the screen that are actually receiving your message. So yeah.
I'm not sure if I would follow that.
Yeah, you're like, nah.
I'm somehow on the other side. Like the more outrage, the better. Like it gives me additional reach and stuff. And you will always have half of the population that doesn't like you, right? So like burning the brand. Hmm,
Do you think scale matters though? Because I used to think that too, right? I was like, your
hmm.
product is your brand. It doesn't matter. But then, at least in Canada, the market's not that big, and we reached a point where we're spending like 3 million per month, every single person is seeing a Wealthsimple ad, multiple times a day. And I think that that started to influence how people felt. And maybe if they didn't like the ads, maybe they felt more annoyed and stuff like that. Or again, if the ad frequency was too high, it would really irritate people in a way that I just had never seen before when I was working with smaller budgets. I wonder, maybe too, you're working with bigger markets, so you're not really reaching that upper bound, but I'm curious to know if that influences, if like the size of the company and the amount of spend influences your strategy, or you're like, no, we're doing performance, like, doesn't matter.
Size of the company 100% influences it because from my experience, what I've seen so far, it was always as soon as the company reaches a certain point, there will always be some brand marketer and get this person gets a lot of power. And from that moment onwards, you just lose in performance marketing. You have this constant struggle. And you can't just do anymore what you were used to do before when it comes to performance marketing, and you get your boundaries, right? Which is good in one way. On the other hand, it makes life sometimes just more difficult. And I guess brand marketers often have difficulties explaining why this is necessary, right? So why is it good that we are not going the dark way, let's say? But yeah, in general, I've worked with many startups as well, and I think you can always create a little bit of outrage and negative comments on ads and stuff, unless you see it's really overtaking is one thing, obviously, right? So there still needs to be some people that like what you're doing, and you usually see that by the downloads, conversions, whatsoever. But then the question still is, do they really love that product, right? Or is it just so, okay, nice to have? If they really love it and defend it against the outrage people, amazing. Then your job is done, basically. This is how I see it.
Oh, totally. Actually, I have an example of an ad that comes to mind that I want to share with you. So exactly what you say, kind of these meme ads or things that generates engagement, it just performs so well. But you want it to have like some sort of value to the business and not just be pure like rage bait. An ad that we ran at Wealthsimple, I mean, we can't really do this as much anymore, but when we started, we didn't really follow the rules, I guess. And so an ad that worked really well was, it was a tweet, and on one side you had a receipt of a salad, like a really expensive salad, and it specifically said like no nuts because there's a nut allergy, and there was kombucha in the order or whatever. Then on the other side, it was a screenshot of a stock and the price of the stock. And then the headline of the tweet was like, LMAO, I can't believe I just bought a stock for a lower price than the salad that I purchased. Or and then like we played so many different iterations showing different stocks, this and that. And then in the comments, it worked so well because people were like making fun of the nut allergy. They're like, "Well, yeah, but you bought kombucha and that cost an extra." Like people were really obsessed with the receipt, and but at the same time, it really emphasized the fact that you can buy a stock, you can get started for very little, and you can actually buy a stock for less than your salad. And so if you think you don't have the money, like you can just pivot.
Especially now,
Yeah, that was
unfortunately.
probably yeah, especially now. That was one of our best ads that we had in a while, but it got shut down, as you can imagine, because yeah, it's not necessarily brand compliant, but effective. So yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah. I mean, in the end of the day, if you really just follow performance marketing rules and look for the clicks and engagement and downloads and whatsoever, you will very often end up with a half-naked woman on the ad, right? And this is obviously something you don't want to follow if you want to have a long-lasting business and build a brand in some way. And talking about more your view on growth marketing and the success with Wealthsimple, you've been multiple times in the #1 Canadian App Store charts, had a lot of millions of downloads there. How did you get there, or how did you get repeatedly into the top charts in the Canadian App Store? Did you have a special trick there that you created some viral ads or something?
When I first joined Wealthsimple, I was working on a product called Wealthsimple Cash, and that product definitely spiked to #1 in the App Store a couple times. So I'll tell you how we went viral, but I need to give you a bit of context on the product first. So Wealthsimple Cash, when we launched it, it was its own app, and it was designed to be a peer-to-peer money sending app like Cash App or Venmo. And an app like Cash App or Venmo is only really useful to you when you download it if the people that you want to send money to and your friends are actually on the app. And when I joined Wealthsimple, I here I am, I have this app, but there's no users on the app. So how do you actually grow it? And how do you grow an app that actually has utility to it? And the answer to that is growing within a network. There's this theory that if you hit about 30% saturation within a network, your product will continue to grow organically, virally, and via word of mouth. And so I had an app and I had a theory, and I figured that if I can reach a certain density within a network, that the growth would take care of itself. And naturally, there's no tighter network than a campus, so we focused our energies on growing our product within campuses. And so when we first started, naturally we were doing ads, but you can imagine that with a 1% click through rate, you're never going to get to like a 30% market penetration. It's just not going to lead to the density that you need. And like naturally, the smaller your audience, the more expensive your CPMs and all that. It just ads were not the way. And so we had to try a bunch of different things. And I'm curious if you can guess actually what ended up working for us. We needed a channel that had like really high reach and really, really high conversion rate once we did reach the people.
Okay. And you said you need to have a certain density in a network. Would you then define the network, in this case, really the campus, the entire student portfolio, or the student audience on that campus, or
Yeah,
did you
exactly.
break it down even further? Ah, okay.
No, the network was the entire student body. So like the 40,000 students that were on a given campus.
I see. Okay. And how did did you achieve it, this density level, and how did you measure that?
Yeah, so basically the thing that ended up working for us is actually giving students free bubble tea, basically. So what
No
we ended up
jokes.
doing, yeah, I never would have thought that free bubble tea would be my primary growth channel, but it was for like a good year or so. So essentially, what we did is before we'd go to a campus, we'd figure out what all the most popular places are for students. We'd partner with those businesses, and then we'd have like ambassadors there, A-frames, so on and so forth. We'd be like, if you become a client, you get a free bubble tea. And like the impression to conversion ratio was like 80 or 90%. Pretty much everyone who came across the offer would participate. And then we paired that with referrals. And naturally, once we got to a certain density, people started to trust the product. They saw it wasn't a scam. They got their free bubble tea. So they start sharing it with their friends. And we actually started to go pretty viral within group chats because people would participate and then they'd be hooking up their friends with the offers and stuff like that. And by using that, we get up to like 70% of density in campuses. We really managed to take over the campus entirely in a matter of like a month or two. And at the time, it really felt like we were everywhere. So we would go to the campuses to kind of see how our growth efforts were playing out. And we'd see that, for the promos, there'd be lines around the block. We'd be getting like thousands of students per weekend just by giving them like free food and free bubble tea and stuff like that. And you'd go up to a student on campus and you'd be like, hey, like, have you heard of this app? And they're like, oh, yeah, everybody's been telling me about it. Everyone's trying to get me to use the referral code, so on and so forth. So, like, clearly, we had a pretty significant presence. And at least within the campus itself, we'd gone viral. Though the times, I guess I could talk about the times that we went viral on the App Store. It's not directly related to our efforts on campus, but kind of similar situation, I suppose. So again, this was during COVID where people were not really doing much, and influencers on Instagram Live had a really captive audience. And we partnered with one comedian in particular, just a local Canadian guy. But he had an audience of like tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And he promoted us in one of his live streams. And at the same time, we were partnered with a couple other influencers that are kind of in a adjacent space as him, who are also sharing the referral code and talking about the product. And we saw that really like spiked our growth. And then the people that were being acquired were sharing their referral codes with each other. So we were growing that way. And people started posting on Twitter. And what we did with Twitter was, or at the time it was called Twitter, we were doing these cash drops. So whenever people would talk about us on Twitter, we would DM them and be like, hey, host a cash drop for us. So the person would do a post and say, like, drop your cash handle in the comments, and the first however many people are going to get cash. So we're literally there with our phones, like sending money to these people's cash handles in the thread. And it just like it created such a frenzy. Everybody was like posting about cash, and like we really overtook this network. And naturally, like download velocity influences your ranking in the app store. So this is one example of like it kind of started with these influencers, people posting, then we kind of fed into the frenzy, and we just had a huge spike in downloads, which pushed us all the way to number one in the app store.
Oh, I have so many questions. The how much cash did you provide to those people? Like, was it $10 or something?
We were sending them like $1, $5, whatever,
So really
like
micro,
small amounts,
micro
but we
money.
were doing it so much. And I think that there was just such a, maybe it was a combination too of the right audience, but it just had such a kind of frenzied effect to it. And people were really hyped about it and participating in these threads, and the tweets were going viral and all of that. So
I remember PayPal was growing in the same way. They gave like a $20 or something to if you invited your friends, and they also grew like crazy at the time. But I mean, this is like so long ago. I would not expect that it still works with even this little money. I guess it was then even less.
the referral bonus, so it was structured in a way that you had, there was a referral bonus. The referral bonus itself varied. Sometimes it was five, sometimes it depends kind of on the network. We went up to like $50 per referral. But in the cash drop, so the part on the Twitter thread, that's where we were sending like smaller amounts, but it was still enough to kind of create this buzz and frenzy and people like wanting to get the free money and stuff like that.
Yeah, nice. And I guess with the cash drop, the acquisition costs were then much lower than paid social, I would assume.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and that's kind of the benefit even just of referrals as a channel, is that you know you kind of have control over the CAC. You see the value of the clients that you're bringing in, so you have kind of pretty tight control on your unit economics. With paid social, it's like you give your money to Facebook and or whatever platform, and you're kind of just hoping for the best and that people actually convert, but you don't always know what's going to happen. So that's definitely one of the benefits that we see with incentives, and one of the reasons why we've really taken to kind of scaling those types of channels like referrals, or the free iPhones and stuff like that.
Do you see such methods working for other categories of apps, or is it, would you say this is exclusive to FinTech?
It really depends. And I should start by saying that obviously we didn't invent incentives, and a lot of different types of business leverage it in their own way, right? It could be like a discount or a promo code or a sign up offer. So people use incentives in all kinds of ways that are effective. And just what makes it work for us and what allowed us to bring it into our own performance marketing stack is that we actually treat it like a growth channel. So it's subject to incrementality. It's subject to a strict payback period, and we really use all the data we have to run it as effectively as possible, as if it was any other paid channel. And what we see for us is that it works really well when you're trying to get a user to overcome a step that has a lot of friction. So with students on campuses, it was getting them to kind of trust the company and sign up and join the app. When it comes to consolidating, moving your account over can be a bit of a tedious process. It's not time consuming, but it's just the type of thing that people procrastinate and don't really want to do. It's a chore. So if you give them an incentive, they kind of overcome that inertia of maybe something that they wanted to do or they've been thinking of doing but wouldn't have done otherwise. And I mean, for us, if you move your money sooner, that's great, because if you move your money a year earlier, that's a year of revenue that we can capitalize on. And for the user, usually it's better too, because lower fees and things like that. So it's a bit of a win-win from that perspective. But you definitely want to find actions that have high enough friction where, again, if you're moving your account to Wealthsimple, it's something that people procrastinate, they don't really want to do. You don't see a lot of people who are like moving their life savings around from one bank to another. It's high friction to do it, but once you do it, it's a high retention conversion. So if your business has a similar types of conversion that are really high value, but have kind of this maybe inertia, or they're just higher friction, those tend to be really good things to focus on when it comes to those bigger incentives that you give.
I have a question about the logistics because you mentioned giving the money away was a lot of texting yourself or sending money yourself, probably by hand. I would assume you didn't expect such a success. And on the other hand, also the bubble tea or the MacBooks and everything, this is physical goods. How did you solve that logistically?
Well, the bubble tea, that was a bit simpler because we were partnering directly with the business. So we were just present at the location, but the business itself was making and distributing the bubble tea. Those events were actually at the businesses. But when it comes to Apple products and stuff like that, that's been something that we've had to build infrastructure around. So the first time we did it, it was really scrappy, like involving type forms and trying to match what people wanted to their address and so on and so forth. But now we've built a much more robust process where all of it is productized. There's an operations team that helps handle it, and it's a lot more robust than the V1 version of the Apple campaign that we ran.
Became a product itself, obviously, then like probably with an own team that has to go over maintenance and improvements. Do you run the conversion rate optimization on these things as well? Like, do you have a specialist who's looking into make the button bigger, smaller, optimizing these kind of things?
Yeah, so when we proved out that incentives would be a successful channel for us, that unlocked design and product and engineering resources for us. And now we work as a cross-functional team that's very embedded. So every promo, we try to add improvements, both from learnings of a previous promo. So let's say the customer service team will tell us what were the biggest complaints and the biggest issues on the client side. But then on the design side, what we try to do is add any improvements that we can. And for example, something that I didn't expect, because I was kind of thinking, the cash is doing the talking. Like, how much can the UX really influence the conversion of these campaigns? And it turns out that it actually makes a huge difference. So a lot of the improvements have actually been one of the levers by which we've been able to be more and more successful with every campaign. And one thing that worked really well is adding countdown timers to our. So a lot of our promos are built in app. So adding countdown timers really helped. So both on the marketing card and on the breather modal that pops out itself, you kind of show time counting down. We saw that a lot fewer people missed the deadline, and people kind of moved more assets before their time was up because now they had a clear idea of exactly, down to the second how much time they had left. So things like that are really effective. And ultimately, with every campaign, we try to test more and more improvements to the user experience, whether it's gamifying it more or changing the copy or the user experience.
The countdown timer I recognize also more and more everywhere,
Yeah,
and it
it
also
works. Yeah.
it works.
There's one app that kind of pulled up the countdown timer, so it's directly on the home screen under the kind of reward bell. I'm like, oh, that has to be the thing we test next. Just when you open the app, you're gonna see it counting down in your face. I'm sure that's gonna work. So
Pretty sure.
until it
About the
doesn't,
teams,
for now it does.
maybe as a last part, let's talk about your team structure. You mentioned like you have an embedded growth team that does a little bit of product, a little bit of marketing, referrals, incentives. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Where do you sit, and how does it play with product together? And what do you have under your responsibilities?
So I lead user acquisition and then cross sell and retention. And the team is divided into three groups. One that's focused on user acquisition, so that's more referrals, lead generation, and paid search and just search in general. Then we have the teams that are more focused on cross sell and upsell, and retention. So that team is kind of split into two with two distinct goals, but their channels are primarily our in-app channels themselves, and any kind of, again, incentive campaigns or even improvements in the app design and stuff like that. So each leader has their own goal, but they work cross-functionally with a product team, engineering, and data science. And since we have product and data embedded kind of within marketing, it really gives us a lot more levers that we can work with. And it also just gives us a bigger pool of ideas too. Like, you have the perspective of people who have a different specialty than you, and oftentimes, their ideas are things that we wouldn't necessarily think of, but end up working super well. So that's been a model that's been extremely effective for us, and that I would recommend to anybody who's trying to figure out how to structure their team. Give the marketers product control or product access, maybe.
Don't do that with me. Like, I would just destroy everything. But I personally, I'm clearly a marketer. I'm really not into product. I have to admit. I mean, I have an idea when I see an app and see the onboarding. Okay, this will work. This won't work. But giving me as a marketer product responsibility, I think this would, at least for my person, it would be a fail.
It's so effective, though. I think I really downplayed the efficacy that, or how much influence the product design could have on, cross sell, for instance. But at the moment, I think that the product design is the single biggest lever that we have for cross sell specifically. If you're in the user acquisition world, I understand how like it might not be as alluring. You're like, yeah, sure, onboarding can help, but also it's onboarding. It's kind of an annoying thing to work on. But when you think about cross sell and those types of down the funnel conversions that you want, I think that the product is where the most impact can be had. So I've come to love and embrace product, even though I started off probably more like you and just being like, get people like top of funnel, get them in the door. Other people will figure out how to get what they want out of
But they have a biggest lever often, right? Like a 1% conversion rate improvement often has a bigger
it.
impact than getting the CPM down by 10 cents. Um, maybe as a last question, what advice would you give to new leaders stepping into their first growth or marketing leadership role?
That's a good question because it's not an easy transition to make. And for me, what really helped me click was when I started to think of myself as a pro athlete. I know that might sound silly, but bear with me. So, like a pro athlete, I want to win as much as possible and I want to perform at my peak as much as possible. And in order to do that, it's not just about, putting as many hours as possible, like in the gym or, training. Other things are important too, like, studying, looking at your competitors, like studying your own tape. You really need to rest and recover. So, like eating well and sleeping. And even just like your psychology and being able to be level headed and calm and able to make good decisions. All of these factors are really important for an athlete, and they're really important as a marketer as well, especially if you want to kind of have good ideas and be strategic and execute well. So that thinking of it that way really helped me reframe how I thought about work and rest and the importance of it all. And that also trickles down to my team. So if we keep the sports analogy, when you become a growth lead, typically it's because, maybe you're the star on the team and like you're used to taking all the shots and scoring all the goals and everyone thinks you're great. And that's probably why you're getting promoted. But in your new role as a team lead, that's going to change. And the spotlight's no longer going to be on you. It's going to be on the people on your team if you're a people manager. So now you're no longer the person who's taking all the shots and scoring all the goals, but you're more like the person making the assists and making sure that the other players are in a position to take the shots and score the goals. And it could be really hard to get used to that transition of like you're no longer the person in the limelight all the time. And it's hard to resist the temptation of being like, oh, like I could have taken the shot better myself, or like if I did it myself, it would be better. But now with the bigger team, like the impact of your team is how you're being measured and how you're winning. So it's more like, if you're the coach, how often your team wins is now your measure of success, less so your performance as an individual. So I think like getting used to that transition and being able to measure success in a different way is something that takes some getting used to. But I find that analogy is really good to kind of remind me of, what success looks like in this new role and how I can measure it for myself now that I'm not having necessarily as many executional like campaign wins directly.
I see it the exact same way. Thanks for confirming.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm a big fan of enablement of the team.
Yeah.
Like I would rather take a step back and let the team shine, and let them show what they are capable of, and on their way towards the goal, only give them a little bit of direction and maybe share the experiences that I had because most of the time, at least in my company, I'm probably a little bit significantly older than the most of the team members, and I've seen a couple of more things. So this is just obvious that I can share a couple of experiences that I had on the way in my career, and hopefully this helps them to go their way and really outperform when doing their jobs, right? So I see it the exact same way.
Totally.
Perfect. Natasha, it was great talking to you. Thanks for coming and joining us in Let's Talk Ads. I hope the audience also liked it. I guess they did. And if you did, please contact Natasha if you have more questions about incentives and virality and how to get more referrals on your product. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're here to boost your growth, marketing tips, fun and chats.